This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hello and welcome to Daughterhood, the podcast. I am your host, Roseanne Corcoran, Daughterhood Circle Leader and Primary Caregiver. Daughterhood is the creation of Ann Tumlinson, who has worked on the front lines in the healthcare field for many years and has seen the multitude of challenges caregivers face. Our mission is to support and build confidence in women who are managing their parents' care. Daughterhood is what happens when we put our lives on hold to take care of our parents. We recognize this care is too much for one person to handle alone. We want to help you see your efforts are not only good enough, they are actually heroic. Our podcast goal is to bring you some insight into navigating the healthcare system, provide resources for you as a caregiver as well as for you as a person, and help you know that you don't have to endure this on your own. Join me in Daughterhood. Jerri McElroy is a full-time, in-home dementia family caregiver to her father, Mr. Jerri. She is passionate about care advocacy and created First Care for Me to encourage family caregivers to prioritize self-preservation for their own health and well-being. Jerri is a published author, artist, minister, and also a Daughterhood Circle Leader. Aisha Adkins is an Atlanta-based family caregiver, founder, writer, thought leader, speaker, and organizer who is passionate about building an equitable, inclusive, and comprehensive public health and care infrastructure using media, storytelling, culture, and policy change. She is committed to making an impact across the country for unpaid caregivers of color through her new venture, Caregivers of Color Collective. In this episode, we discuss the challenges of marginalized caregivers through experiences in the healthcare system and in family dynamics, generational trauma, the importance of allyship, caring for yourself in the midst of it all, and so much more. I hope you enjoy our conversation. What are some of the unique challenges Black caregivers or caregivers of color face that others may not know about? Jerri, you first.
Again, I think we are all aware of stereotypes. The first one that comes to mind is the mad Black woman and how we show up in spaces and, supposedly cuss people out and, just show ourselves in a very unhealthy and unprofessional way when we're in hospitals or, having to address things, negligence of our loved ones. And I think because I know it's so real, because I know people are expecting that from me, that's never been my temperament. I am not the angry Black woman. And my anger shows up in the way administratively. Like I'm getting names. I'm reading name tags. I'm calling the nurse manager. I'm getting in touch with the director. Like that is how my anger shows up. So you're not going to get me flinging words, profanity, and all of that at the nurse's station. Like that's not how I show up. However, I do have your name. Mm-hmm. This will be reported, So right. For me, it's just, you can see it. I can see people kind of tense up when I'm addressing something because they're looking for this to escalate. It won't escalate that way. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's always something that I'm very aware of when it comes to how I have been navigating this caregiving journey with my dad. Dealing with the VA. He's a veteran. That space is not easy to navigate as a civilian, someone who was very ignorant to military systems and the VA system and their acronyms and all that type stuff. And they don't try to explain anything. And so it was through fellow veterans, some of my family who are in military and everything, and them kind of making suggestions or offering, resources that helped me navigate. And so, yes, there was a frustration in that. And at the same time, the persistence to push past the red tape. Like I'm being told by other veterans that he deserves certain things as a veteran. And so the stonewalling, the gatekeeping that the VA and veterans do, I had to push past all of it. So for me, it's been twofold. Not only am I Black, but I'm a civilian. I don't know military systems. And so I feel like I was dealing with layers with navigating the VA and trying to really secure different benefits and resources for him when all of it first started happening.
I share your sentiments around how Black women are perceived. And I'll also say that when you are combating the stereotypes, I think also one of the challenges that I have faced is when I approach righteous anger, right? Because there are also instances in which anyone, regardless of race, gender, what have you.
Wrong is wrong.
Right. Wrong is wrong. And there are instances that have taken place where I've been caring for my mother, caring for my father, and to be livid is appropriate in that moment. Right. And I think, unfortunately, it doesn't leave, when you look at stereotypes, it doesn't leave space for those moments, for the pain, for the frustration. And I think
for the humanity of the moment.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think, that's something that I've had to navigate is, when you're having an emotional response. I think the thing that also people fail to articulate at times is the emotionality of caregiving and how it can be very difficult at times to separate emotion from that more administrative piece that you're speaking of, Jerri. And it takes this like a whole other plane that you have to elevate to in order to say, okay, in this moment, I'm putting on this administrative hat. But then there's this moment where I need to let that emotion out. And unfortunately, there aren't enough spaces that are curated for Black women, for women of color to go and to express that emotion in a way that may be constructive and in an environment that is safe. Right. And I think there aren't enough of those spaces. And that's what I've really been trying to dedicate my time to with the limited time that I have to really developing more of that.
For sure. And even when you say that, Aisha, sometimes we as Black women don't extend enough grace to each other, because, when we look at ageism, the different generations, I know when it first started, like I did get a little whiny when it came to the idea that I was going to have to deal with my father's genitals. And my mom did the whole tough love thing. She's like, you'll be able to do it. You can do it. I don't know if I needed that in that moment, like extend me some empathy, how about you do it the first couple of times, let me gradually, but no, she kind of pushed me in the door. Like, no, this is what you have to do. You'll be able to do it because it has to be done. And so I think sometimes we don't even within the circle of Black women, sometimes don't extend enough empathy or sympathy or grace for those emotions to be fully released and expressed in a way that it really needs to be.
Agreed.
Along with grief.
Yes.
Because grief shows up in caregiving in stages. Along the decline of the person is a grief journey in itself, because we're losing who we knew. And we're literally watching them not only go through their own grieving process that my body is failing me, but then we're seeing them become more dependent and less of who we knew them to be. And so acknowledging that grief journey while they're living and then when they actually pass on, that's two different versions of grief.
Exactly.
And for the caregiver, that does not get acknowledged or processed or given space to process, as you were saying.
Right. I agree. And I think the challenge with that as well is that there's a lack of grief literacy just societally. And I think particularly in Black communities, it's like, oh, well, I'm gonna pray for you. Yes. And
Right.
I need a little bit more than that, because
Yep.
in and of itself, I'm a woman of faith. I'm a Christian. I believe in, prayer, but I also believe that we need to have conversations about what it looks like to grieve, what the people experiencing grief actually need that is supportive, other than, well, you'll be blessed, when you get to heaven, you'll get your crowns. That's great. But right now, I'm witnessing what I'm witnessing, and it's painful. And what I need is an ear that's going to listen without judgment, right? What I need is some communal care, right? I need that sense of community. And so I would agree with you, Jerri, in that there can be a lack of support internally. And so there are these dual battles that we find ourselves kind of confronted with, of, systemic external factors, but then also internally when we're seeking out that community, when we're seeking out the support, and we don't always receive it, and we have to go find it, which is labor in and of itself. That's really, really difficult. That's really
For sure.
difficult.
And that's part of the familialism, correct?
Yep.
Where you're expected to put the needs of your family ahead of yourself. And it's cultural, and it just kind of goes with it, but it leaves you flopping, just kind of hanging in the breeze. So how do you find that space for yourself in those moments when you know that's what you're up against?
So for me, I think, first of all, the acknowledgement that our generation is more informed about our emotions, more in touch and aware of our emotions than the baby boomers. And I'm, speaking more in the aspect of my mom. My mom and dad are both 72. They were born in 52. And so, this is my example of how emotions were or were not addressed. She and I have had some very open conversations about her dynamic with her mother and what that looked like, and even more closed off and not expressive. She says she can't remember when her mom said, I love you, that type thing. And so understanding how it has morphed, and evolved from one generation to the next. So I do feel, as a 47-year-old, soon to be 48, Gen Xer, and I don't know if it was being exposed to the internet. I feel like this was happening even before the internet. I remember being very, very aware of my emotions, even in high school and middle school, and my mother giving space for some of those expressions, to be had. And so I think in her lacking what she lacked from her mother, she tried to be a different type of mother and give us space, which allowed me to be in more connection with my feelings and emotions. And so again, as a mother myself, did even more with my children. And so I say that to say that the fact that we acknowledge what we need and where we are, and really kind of honing in on what am I feeling right now, I think we are a little bit more aware of our emotions than the generation before us. That being said, I know in my own journey, I was very careful to look for spaces and communities and groups that would connect with where I was. I knew I had a village, but I also knew that when I talked to certain people, that I would get what I got, as far as like, oh, you'll be fine. We've been doing this, like, is elders in the family had to take care of blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's not my story. My personal experience, I need to talk to people that can understand where I am in my experience at my age. I started taking care of my dad at 40, still managing my children, dealing with the marriage that was strained, like I need to speak to people who can relate to where I am. And so in reaching out, I started connecting with different caregiver groups online. And then that wasn't enough. I knew I needed in-person connection. And so I think because we are a generation that is more aware, we've had the opportunity to use virtual tools, Google search and all that type stuff to build out our support systems beyond our family, beyond our friends who are not caregiving, who still can't, relate to the level that I wanted to connect. And so, Daughterhood was one of the beautiful treasures that I found in my searches. And also is when I became more aware of how those who were connecting to villages, those who were identifying as caregivers didn't look like me.
Right.
And so that became a part of my journey in 2018 when I found Daughterhood. Like, we're the Black people, because I know we taking care of people, but it was the fact that we weren't even calling ourselves caregivers. Right. We were daughters. My mother took care of her brother until he passed. We were family members taking care of family members. And so that became a big part of my thing. Like, I would, in me meeting people and listening to their stories, I would then say, oh, so you're a caregiver. And they would have the same reaction I had when I was first called a caregiver by a nurse. She was like, oh, so you're your dad's caregiver. And I was like, I'm my dad's daughter. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it just, it just didn't resonate.
Just what I do. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so amazing, Jerri, how much of our journeys have paralleled in that, caring for parents at an earlier age than some folks are often called upon to provide that in their parents' lives. And, I too experienced generations of caregivers within my family. Again, it wasn't called that. First time I ever heard that was at a doctor's office. So it's one of those things that I think familialism, the other piece of that for me, in addition to a greater sense of self-awareness in terms of what we need as caregivers, I think one of the challenges is the expectation that's put specifically on the women and Black families and families of color to perform this work. And it is work. There are people who this is their chosen profession, right? And so we are doing identical work, if not more, and it happens to be intertwined by our relationship to the people that we're providing care for. But it doesn't, let's not let that detract from the fact that it is work, and it is hard work, right? And then add to that the emotional layers. But I mention that because I remember my father saying once, I'm an only child. And I remember him saying, just casually, I'm so glad we didn't have a boy. There's no way he would have done any of this.
Wow.
And I was so taken aback by that. And I always thought of my father as a relatively modern man, grew up during women's
equal
lib era.
Opportunity.
Exactly. And so I was shocked when he said that, because in my mind, I'm thinking, had I been born a boy, I would have been, socialized no differently. I would have been raised to care, right? That's what I would hope and assume. I assume incorrectly, it appears, but it's interesting that, we genderize these roles.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, that just puts undue stress and pressure, and the expectations are so high, and it then feeds into that trope of the overperforming Black woman, right? That needs to do above and beyond. And, it's that superhero trope. It's and it's, I don't think of myself, on one hand, I do think of myself as I like to consider myself as someone who is, doing her best, right? And who is excelling despite the odds stacked against me. However, I don't know that I necessarily want to identify as a superhero, right? I don't know that that's a label that I invite, because with that, there's this idea of invincibility, of almost, when we say that someone's superhuman, it's almost to suggest that they're incapable of
being hurt, being in pain.
Exactly. And so, I think we have to be careful when we, position women of color as these otherworldly beings, right?
Yeah.
Instead of the very, fleshly humans that we are. And I think we just need to be careful about that. But I do think that it's something that's unique to the woman experience for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you say that, the vision that comes to mind is the ancient mama vision, of the mammy who was everybody's all, who took care of the white family, the black family, was the grandmother to the plantation, just this whole image that has carried on, the matriarch, the house that everybody goes to get fed, all that type stuff. And I know for me, I protested against that, even in high school. Like my senior book said, no kids, no marriage, like give me 2 dogs in the house and I'm good. Let me focus on career. Now, I was okay when things started changing, when I got pregnant and, that type thing, when things started unfolding. But I do realize that it was definitely a protest, and who I was being exposed to in my teenage years added to that. The messaging was a lot different as far as just the independent woman. And, so I know that there were, outside influences that kind of shaped my mind around who I can be and the fact that I don't need no man and, that type thing. To now reflect and hear, like you're saying, Aisha, what people have said about me as far as being this superwoman, super mom with 6 kids and still doing ministry and still doing community. And, it makes me cringe. It makes me cringe because I didn't ask for the cape. I didn't ask for the cape. I handled life as life came to me. You know what I mean? But that was not a tray that I made for myself. There were definitely things added to my plate that I would not have opted for, and caregiving was definitely one of them, especially not being. So you're an only child. I'm not. I have 3 siblings. So how is it that people only know my face when it comes to the caregiving for my dad? Why is this not a shared burden? Why is this not a shared journey? Why is it that, I have seen other caregivers? My mother-in-law was one of I talk about her siblings all the time. She's one of 12. It was 6 girls, 6 boys. And all 6 of the girls, and I think 2 of the sons, tag teamed with their mom. She was in a nursing home and they would tag team. The one son lived nearby the nursing home in North Carolina, but they would all travel in, stay like 2 weeks, check on mom. That brother who lived locally could go off and do whatever he wanted to, but they tag team. It was like 7 of them that tag team to take care of their mom until, she took her last breath. And I constantly tell her, like, that's just ideal. It's so ideal. And it's only fair, when you think about, she raised us all, like my dad, what he contributed to all of us, as far as just the things that we got or the experiences we had as in our childhood days. Now, of course, we know he had his fight with alcoholism and everything, which kind of, strained the marriage and was the reason why their marriage failed. But we have fond memories. We have, wisdom and knowledge that he, gave to us and is a part of who we all are. And so when I think about the contributions, it was evenly distributed. So why is this caregiving not evenly distributed and carried, So that makes me cringe, to go into a doctor's office and they're doing the profile and they're like, so you're an only child? And I'm like, no. Next question.
Right.
Let's move on. Don't.
Right. You're the one with the cape, though. You're the one with the cape. And that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
And it's not like, it's interesting because it's not like this is some random thing that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
This is actual, there's been research on it. There's been Cheryl Woods Gasumbi's, she's a professor at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Nursing. And she did a large study on the superwoman idea. And she said that the superwoman schema has 5 elements: feeling an obligation to present an image of strength, feeling an obligation to suppress emotions, resistance to being vulnerable, a drive to succeed despite limited resources, and feeling an obligation to help others. Now, we can say all caregivers feel that way, whether they do or not. We could say that. But when you combine this with the angry Black woman trope, schema, and you put that together, me as an Italian woman, I can say I go to these offices and I get loud and everything's fine. If either of you got loud, security would be called.
Yeah.
Yep.
They got the hand on the button already, ready to push it.
Yes.
All we have to do is go up one octave too much, and they're pushing the button.
And that's it. And that is something that's real.
Yeah.
It's not something that we're like, well, this is just different. It is different.
Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah. And to me, the automatic thought that we don't understand. So that is also offensive to me, that because of the time that I have been a caregiver for my dad, that when they ask me what's going on or what's his condition, and I speak clearly and I can pronounce certain words and everything and pronounce his prescriptions, that they're like, oh, like, are you in nursing? Like, are you a nurse?
Yeah.
Why do I have to be a nurse to be able to pronounce words that I have heard for the past 7 years? Like, I mean, it's offensive. Like, what are you really saying?
Yeah.
Now you are watering down who you think I am. And they try to, they explain things and then they'll change the words and try to do it in layman's terms. But I've been in every doctor's office with him. Like, I know the terms at this point. I had to learn the terms. And so you don't have to water it down. Like, say it the way it needs to be said, because I'm his only, continuity of care. So I'm going to have to explain this again to the next doctor. There's no sense in, downgrading it. But the fact that they feel like they need to is offensive to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's this idea of having to develop some kind of explanation behind our existence, right? And it's because I too have been in those conversations, and there's always an immediate, are you, a nursing student? And also, why not a doctor? We all like an automatic downgrade, right? And that's not to
that was good
to imply that there's anything lesser than.
No, you're
also
right.
What's being implied.
Yep.
Right. And so the number of kind of blockades that exist just to getting our loved ones basic care.
Yeah.
Right.
Because of all the isms,
exactly.
The sexism, the ageism, the, racism or colorism or, the economic status. It's just an added layer.
Exactly.
Our skin color is just an added layer to all the other isms.
Right. And that too, what I always focus on, at least for me, is, how it then perpetuates this generational need for care.
Yeah.
Because, we're enduring this constant stress, right? And without a release valve, right, without a container for it, we're then more likely to develop all of these conditions that will then make us more likely to need care in the future. And without the proper systems in place that are going to facilitate that communal care that we've been talking about, that they're going to facilitate a quality of care that we have access to. And, from where I sit, I don't see enough movement in removing these barriers. Right. I see us still another generation or two or three away from the experiences that we're having. We're looking at just a continuation of this generational trauma. It's what it boils down to. It's another form of generational trauma that people just don't talk about. And people don't look at caregiving in and of itself as a potentially traumatic experience, right? Because of the different layers that we're talking about. Right? And I think this is unique to, communities of color, where it's continually put forth through this lens of the isms, right? And there needs to be, and that's where, you were talking about, Roseanne, kind of what role do white folks have in kind of in this ecosystem that exists, right? And that's
Right.
where allyship comes into play.
Right.
And that's where calling out what you see, calling out and also helping to amplify the voices of communities of color that are saying, hey, listen, you know what? These practices are harmful. We can't continue moving in this direction, because there just is going to be continued generation after generation of hurt, of pain, of struggle, and it doesn't have to be this way. That's the thing that always gets to me, is that this is not a necessity, right? It's not a necessary evil. It's just an evil.
Right. Well, and we see that, we also know that in Black and Latino communities, hypertension is higher, diabetes is higher, everything is higher, and then trying to get that care is lower.
Yeah.
And it is the perfect storm. And you had trouble getting a diagnosis for your mother initially. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, initially, there was this speculation, and it was very gendered and very racialized, that my mother, oh, she's just depressed, although she couldn't pass many cognitive tests, right? Didn't know the year, didn't know, these very kind of standard questions that were being asked of her, but it all boiled down to, oh, that's menopause-based depression. No, and immediately. That's when I launched into advocate role, and ended up having to get 4 additional diagnoses before we finally got to an accurate diagnosis of frontotemporal degeneration.
Wow.
And that plays into the fact that, particularly when you look at conditions like a dementia, but really I'd say across the board, that the likelihood of early diagnosis and early intervention is lower for communities of color, for Black folks in particular, and it has everything to do with lack of access. At the time, we had the money to continue running these tests, to continue seeing these doctors, because she wasn't yet eligible for Medicare, which would have covered some of these things. But because it's an early onset form of the disease, she wasn't yet eligible. Due to systemic reasons, my father had been laid off. It was just kind of this whole, that it's that perfect storm, right, brewing, that without my continued advocacy and without some of the resources that we had at the time, she would not have received even the care that she ultimately was able to get. But it was very, as an experience overall, very dehumanizing, very, very heartbreaking to see that people were not, that these predominantly white, predominantly male physicians were not taking my mother's care seriously, that they were not listening to me. They were not listening to my father when we were saying this is what her lived experience is. And I feel like, as I care now for my father, I'm experiencing similar, challenges in getting him the care. We've yet to hear about any clinical trials, right? And you would think that immediately when you are diagnosed with something for which there is no cure, but there are ample trials that are available for better treatments and eventually cures, and you represent a population that is underrepresented in these trials, why are we not hearing about these things yet? And then eventually, you reach a point in terms of progression in these diseases where you've surpassed viability and you are no longer eligible to participate in these trials, right? And that's how we end up, again, it's cyclical. We end up right back in the same positions over and over again. But that's something that I continue to advocate for. And, as my father battles vascular dementia now, just ensuring that he gets access to what he needs, but it's a battle and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And I have a similar story around diagnoses, because in 2017, my dad was 65, being diagnosed with early onset of dementia. Nothing was presented as a fix or a supplement of any sort. I knew nothing about dementia meds or, of course, we're almost 8 years into this journey now. And the first time dementia meds were mentioned to me was last year,
Oh,
six years into this process. And to your point, Aisha, some of the trials that were presented to us in the past couple of years, because he's nonverbal, he can't participate. He's ineligible because they have prompts and questions that they want to ask to see the consistencies or inconsistencies. And so, but I think so. I have no choice but to think about those type of things. Like if dementia meds were presented to us in 2017 when he was first diagnosed, could he still have a voice now? Could he still be verbalizing? But here we are.
here we are.
And it's so, quality of life, right, is something that when I think of my role and like what is my purpose as my parents' caregiver, and it's to, within the best of my abilities, for me to provide them with a decent quality of life, right?
To age with dignity.
To age with dignity.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are opportunities to advance that goal, and they're just not being presented to me and my family, I know it's not because I've failed.
Right.
I'll say that. I'll say that. Right.
It
It's
is
because
not.
the systems that are put in place are continuing to fail Black and brown folks in this country.
Yeah. Because for some reason, again, when I think back, for some reason, I don't even know the reason. Like he got his diagnosis for dementia. The test was done at the VA medical center. So I don't know why, things were not presented to us then. That to speak with a neurologist outside of the VA last year, my dad was a new patient, and the test that he wanted to do, and he was like, yeah, let's see if we can find something that'll bring his words back. And I'm like, where were you in 2017? Like, why? And I think that's my other thing. Like, how is it that everybody has been educated in certain disciplines, but you handle your patients differently?
Yeah.
What is that, and why is that? Are we now looking at the economic differences? Because this is VA based, and VA only pays you so much that you're not gonna fully care for your patient. Is that what we're doing?
Mm-hmm.
Are we piecemealing because of the back office payments that are equal or not? Like, how does that work? I don't understand that. Because if your education, if you know the information, if you have the answer for somebody's life, to your point, where they can age more gracefully with more quality of care, and have a better quality of life, why wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Don't y'all take an oath to
Right.
do well by the patient? Like, how do you stop your brain from offering care, from offering a solution, or whatever that may be, to make someone's life better?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's holding hope hostage.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. I think it's really like we're given diagnoses and we're just supposed to accept it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's another system, right? It's another system. The VA is a different system than Medicare, than Medicaid. So it's almost like however it fits in this system is how it's going to go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So with both of you caregiving in different ways, but similar ways, what is it that makes you say, I'm going to try to change this? And what is it that you want to try to change?
I think I've gone back and forth with that question, Roseanne, to be quite frank, because there's a part of me that, like Aisha was saying earlier, wrong is wrong. The righteous indignation rises up, and you want to just, for the principle of the matter, make it better for everybody. But then as a caregiver, as a Black woman who is already carrying a certain amount of life, it's like, you know what? I can't fix the world. and I can't show up for everybody. So let me take care of my little corner of community. You know what I mean? Let me take care of me first. Let me put my mask on first and see what I have left to give. And if I can offer my voice to a conversation, if I can, offer my voice to an advocacy cause or something, I will do that. But really getting to a point to just say, I can't save the world. I can't. I didn't ask for the cape, like I said before, and I can't save the world. I can't take on the burden of changing these systems that are going to push against the bricks, and is my voice big enough to really make the change that needs to be made? So it's a back and forth for me. I think, meeting Aisha through Caring Across Generations and being a part of that fellowship program and, understanding, the different ways that advocacy shows up made me, empowered me in a lot of ways to feel like, okay, so let me just continue to offer my story, offer my voice when given the opportunity, in hopes that it pushes the needle forward,
Right.
But I am very much more aware of my capacity now that I've stepped into caregiving, and I just will not strain myself, empty myself for the sake of carrying the world. I can't. It's not mine to carry.
Yeah, I echo your sentiments, Jerry. Have done a lot within the last few months. I've done a lot of contemplation around what do I have at this point now that I am in kind of a transitional space where caring for my mother, that role has reached its sunset in 2023. And now I'm in the sunrise of really caring more hands-on for my father, what is left of me, right? And what I'm looking for is the opportunity to collaborate in seeking out those spaces, because I know that it's very important to fill myself back up, but it's finding those resources that are conducive to that kind of activity for myself. And I think I too am kind of going back and forth in between, how much do I create with what limited capacity I have? And, how much do I just hope and pray that others are of like mind to also create? I think I've really started to uplift individual relationships in my own life and really spend time kind of cultivating those as opposed to kind of this more macro approach. It's something that I'm still passionate about, but I also have to kind of come to terms with the reality, and that caregiving without having that oxygen, mask connected to something at the other end can be depleting at times. And I think plugging into community and plugging into to therapy and all of the modalities that comes into play, those are the ways that I replenish myself. And then once I've done that, I sit down and I usually write about it. And I sit down and I say, what, is there an outlet I can share my experience with? Is there, I'm grateful to have opportunities like this where, there are shared platforms where I can, have these conversations. And so I think that, yeah, I likewise, I'm always just contemplating what is the best use of the limited time that I have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you just said something too. So I'll say this. I feel like my experience last fall, the roller coaster of emotions to at the end of July hit such a high and be so like, oh, we can do this. And to have given of myself, I don't even know where I got the capacity, but I was excited to move the needle forward with the announcement that came out at the end of July. And I rallied the troops. I, hosted several events, co-collaborated, but hosted events in the name of really, lifting up the campaign and everything. And the day after election hit me like a ton of bricks. And there is no greater feeling of defeat than I felt the day after the election. I really shut down. I really had to do some processing. I knew me and my co-collaborator, owed some type of message to, the women who had come alongside of us. And I had nothing. I had nothing. I had to find my own somebody to say something, and I had reached out to my co-collaborator and I was like, I know we need to say something. And I told her, I was like, I don't know. I don't have anything to say right now. Like, I have no words, and it was just such a raw, just blew my mind. That is not how I thought I was going to wake up the day after election. And, it really did something. I think it really shook the foundation for a lot of people that just did not think that would be the outcome. And then it makes you sit and say, to really understand how big of a system that's fighting against you. When we think about the change that is needed, when we think about the systems and the work that we know we could do with the right support, the message in the day after election was very profound in saying, you don't have the support you think you have. And it was difficult to swallow. That was a big, hard pill to swallow. And it did leave me in a lot of reflection of saying, well, what the hell? Why? Why? Why keep giving to the level that I'm giving when this is the response? Yes. What you're showing me is you're not as supportive as you say you are. It makes me literally want to move forward in collaborating and saying, let me see your election ticket. I really need to know where you stand. It just really, I had to process. And I know that experience shifted me in a way that I am being very careful and intentional and strategic with how I move forward with collaborating, with sharing platforms, with any community, because I do understand that there were, voters who voted in the Black community, differently than I did. And so I'm just, because I need to understand. I need to understand. I don't understand. Yeah. And I just need to know. I need to know who I am partnering with. And is allyship really how I define allyship? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think to that point, Jerri, I think it comes back to this sense of safety that's always been precarious, right? And I think when that is taken off of the table, it's a scary place to live.
For sure.
And I think the challenge, that I find is that there's so much unknown that we are facing politically as it pertains to what kind of access we're getting to the kind of care that we need, what kind of red tape we'll have to maybe cut through.
Yeah.
All of these things that exist, that have always existed, right?
Right.
But are they about to be elevated in any way? And so I too have a lot of questions. I think I've just kind of been going through the motions in so many ways over the course of the last several months. And I think, being very particular, of course, but I think I won't say that I'll say it. I wasn't surprised, unfortunately, by the results that we saw. But that doesn't make me any less afraid.
Right.
And concerned. And I think for me, my father's always going to be my number one priority, right? And right now, and anything that gets in the way of me caring as fully as I can, I'm going to come after it, and that may or may not be on grand stages or, on a grand scale, but I think that's where I put my fight, but it is hard to do that alone.
For sure.
It is hard to do that alone.
Yeah. And I think I brought that up, even Roseanne, when you gave the characteristics around the superwoman, you said something about like survival or the resilient piece.
A drive to suppress emotion, being vulnerable, a drive to succeed despite limited resources.
That part right there.
Yep.
And so I feel like that also was kind of triggered with like, this is why you see the survival mode kick in. This is why we start sourcing and making sure that we can sustain our families and our community, because the bigger picture, the bigger message is showing that you're not there to help. You're not there to share your resources. So let me take care of my village, like let me bring it in. Let me, narrow my scope here and realize that if I don't, the statement that's out there, if we don't take care of us, nobody will.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where it comes from.
Right.
These are the moments that bring us to where we are as far as let me take care of my village, right, because it's very obvious that, we can't do this in the grand scheme.
Yeah.
So how do you, both of you, how do you think, remember after George Floyd, when it was so volatile and everybody was so taken by it. And when it came to trying to be an ally, and we saw this throughout, where it was I can't ask you to explain to me the whole system of anything. I have to find that on my own as a white woman. I have to find that on my own to try to then offer my support. But in offering of the support, sometimes you get afraid of offering the support because you don't know me. If you don't know me, you don't know my heart. So how do we bridge that gap for people to be allies in this whole situation? How does that happen?
I think it's always going to be a challenge. I think it's always going to come down to the heart of the people who are coming to the table. Because while you have those who come with good intentions, as far as establishing an allyship, I think on the side of being a recipient of that allyship as a Black woman, my heart has to be in the right place to receive allyship. I have to be able to let my guard down and really come to the table fully present and fully willing to establish an allyship. I think there is so much between the dynamic between the white woman and the Black woman has so much history behind it as well, that it's just a very delicate place. I think it comes down to vulnerability and transparency on both sides of the table. Before we can talk about allyship, I need to know your heart. I need to know your history. I need to understand why you want to do this work. Why do you want allyship? Don't come to me because of white guilt. I don't want to partner with that. You know what I mean? I don't want to be your charity case. So don't come to me with that. You know what I mean? Like, where is this coming from? Are you really trying to change the trajectory of your community? The people that you can touch. So for me, it's a very raw conversation. You brought up 2020, and I did have, when I think about like my Facebook community, my Facebook following, I have a very diverse following. And I did have a white Facebook friend who commented initially on one of the posts that I had shared about, I shared some different tiles about what you can do, to support the Black community or whatever. And she commented, and then she inboxed me, wanting to meet and everything. And even she and I, when we sat down, I was like, there's a lot of things that we, our paths overlap. We were around the same age, had similar experiences within our marriage and all that type stuff. And I said, I think that's the first thing that you can do is to find the common ground, right? The second thing, again, show me your heart. Show me your reason for wanting to know. If this incident never happened, where would we be? Would you be reaching out to me and wanting to meet? Why haven't we met before? You know what I mean? I really challenge on that aspect. Like, it shouldn't have taken another death for you to reach out. It shouldn't have taken that post. Like, if you want to be in this work, if you want to change the trajectory, show me that you're already doing it. Show me that it's already in you before another death.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, I think that it takes a certain amount of risk and comfort with risk, right?
Yes.
And what I mean by risk is that you have to risk the possibility that your efforts may not be received, right? And that there may be a trauma response there, and you have to be able to say, you know what, I may not understand, but I accept that, because the depth to which some of the pain around race, when layered with things like care and there's a lot of work that has to be done on an individual level, on a community level. And so, you have to just determine whether or not you're willing to take that risk and say, I'm willing to extend my hand, and the other person on the other side has the right to either
react
extend their hand or to pull away and say, you know what? No, I'm not. I am not in a position to receive this at this time, right? And I think that that's something that I saw a lot of, was that people said, well, I'm extending my hand, and now that's not being, the gesture is not being reciprocated. But it's the playing field is not necessarily, the playing field isn't level, right?
Yeah.
And so acknowledging that, and then being able to say, listen, I accept your response, even if that response is anger.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a challenge that can create additional barriers. But I think that also progress is made when people say, you know what, I respect you. And I think it also boils down to respecting the people that you are engaging with, and understanding that response, whether in the affirmative or not, may be seated in a lot of pain that has very little to do with you as an individual, right?
Yes.
But it's the representation, and the way that you show up.
For sure.
Yeah.
And the analogy, even when you just said extending the white hand, to acknowledge the fact that the white hand being extended to the Black community has not always been trusted.
Right.
That has not always shown to be the right hand to grab for the Black community. And so to really acknowledge the reality of what we're dealing with, to your point, the depth of the trauma that comes behind a white hand being extended to the Black community, and what that has looked like over the years. Like, let's just acknowledge that, right? To really understand the layers that have to be peeled back, and where people really have to be in their positioning on both sides of the table to really be able to sit together and establish an allyship. There's a lot to peel back.
Yeah.
And so the zealousness, for a white woman to be excited to, no, I'm here to help. I'm glad that you're excited. However, I need you to let's pace ourselves.
I need a minute.
Yeah.
Give me some time to process, and let me come to you with what it is what it is that's helpful. I think that's the thing, it's about helping to facilitate what's already been decided upon is helpful, not coming to someone and saying, I know what you need. You know what I mean? I think it's also acknowledging that as well, that if you're going to come into a community that you're not a part of, understanding that community or even that individual is going to know best what their needs are and how they can be met.
Right.
That reminds me of an incident I remember, and Roseanne, I think I shared this with you, being at a nurse's station and really having to like get strong in my challenges with the nurses and the people who were there, and a white woman who was in a room with their family member, whatever. She took it upon herself to come out and start challenging the staff on my behalf, like. She shouldn't have to go through this. And I remember kind of like, I don't need that. I don't, because your voice shouldn't be the reason that they start moving. That's not what I want. I need them to hear me, and that should be enough, you know? And so even, you know, those moments, it would have been different, Aisha, to your point, if she came to me and said, is there something that I can do to help you? But she didn't. She took it upon herself to just start speaking on my behalf. You don't even know my situation. You overheard some bits and pieces, you know? And so to have to stop her, it just added to my agitation, you know, like it really did not, it didn't bring, I didn't feel helped in that moment. You know, now I feel like I'm fighting two different battles.
Yeah. So within your caregiving role, while you're navigating all of this, how do you take care of yourself?
So my blessing and burden, my blessing early on in my caregiving journey, my dad was initially diagnosed in 2017. At the top of 2018, February of 2018, me and my three daughters, I have 6 children, 3 girls, 3 boys. Me and my 3 daughters go for annual exams to a Black female doctor. And, you know, we did all the female testing and everything. And so about a week later, we come back in for our lab results, and she wanted to talk to each one of us. And this Black female doctor says, wow, you know, your numbers look really good. And I'm 40 or about to be 40. And I was like, why are you surprised? Like, what did you think they would look like, you know? And she said, well, didn't you say you were a caregiver taking care of your dad? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, well, it's just, she shrugged her shoulders and she said, well, it's just that the caregiver usually goes before the loved one. And it just kind of rolled off her tongue, you know? And I looked over at my daughter like, did she just say that?
Yeah.
And so because I didn't want the words to just linger, my response to combat that was just like, well, that's not going to be my story. Like, don't speak that over my file, over my life. Like, what do you mean the caregiver goes before the loved one?
Yeah.
And I made a decision in that moment. That's not going to be my story. I will make self-preservation priority. And from 2018 on, that same year, I found Daughterhood. That same year, I connected to caregiver support groups. All of that was intentional because at the top of that year, I was told that I was going before my father. Right. No, I'm not. I'm absolutely not. And so my numbers were good then. My numbers will stay good. That's I left the office. She was saying, you know, talking to my daughters, I was so caught up in that statement she made, I don't even remember the rest of the doctor's visit because it agitated my soul that she thought because I was now a caregiver that I was going to die before my father.
Right.
No, that is not, you're not going to speak that over my life. And so, yeah, self-preservation has been a priority. So I have done everything like Aisha was saying. I have a therapist. I have, I have my support people in place. I have had, very transparent conversations with my children. At the time I was still married. So I had a conversation with my spouse about, just really accepting help where help can be offered. Unfortunately, I did not get that from my siblings. And so I had to build in other ways because my whole thing was, I am not going to allow my health to decline at the hands of this journey of caregiving. That's not how it's going down. That's not going to be my story. And so, I do everything. I walk on a regular, 3 to 5 miles. I jump double dutch with women over 40. I just keep myself active. I do yoga. I have hand weights and everything. Of course, in the height of the pandemic, I had a gym membership at one point. So then when the gyms were shut down, I kept myself moving, line dance, I have my systems in place, but it was very intentional. When that was said to me, again, that was one of those moments in life, pivotal moments. That was like, no, that's not how this is happening. Even in me really understanding my capacity with my children as they were getting older, some of them were moving out, and just being careful as a mom to not just run, not just grab my keys every time they call. And even now they are all young adults, and I get calls and I literally pull myself back and take a breath. And I'm like, okay, Jerri, listen to what they're saying and see what you can do from right where you're sitting. That's always my challenge to myself. What can you do from right where you're sitting? Because that way you're not exhausting yourself. You're not adding another thing to your plate. Because if you move, if you grab the keys, if you leave the house, now you're adding something to your plate. And so, I'm just very intentional to check my capacity with every moment.
Love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, similarly to Jerri, when I started the caregiving journey, I was 27. I was pre-diabetic. I was experiencing eye floaters, so that's blind spots in the eye. I had severe chronic migraines, and I went on a health journey where I was very committed to taking care of myself, very much because, again, various folks had told me once I heard that word caregiver, then, people do tend to tell you, oh, you're not going to survive this, is basically what they're saying. And, I knew that my mother couldn't do anything about her dementia diagnosis, but I could do as much as I could, to care for myself. And, I went on a journey. I walked, I lost nearly 100 pounds at the time.
Wow.
I have made sure that I, get my annual exams and, get my physical and all of those things and stay on top of my prescriptions. And, mental health is paramount to me. And so, I've got a couple of different therapists, and, group therapy and all of the things that I'm doing to kind of build myself up and to wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, but I do also sit from a place of some privilege. Not everyone has access to this kind of care, right?
Yeah.
And so, I say that and acknowledge that not everyone listening may have access to the kind of care that they would like, that they need for their particular, be it health condition or be it whatever it is that they're encountering in their journey. And that just harkens back to the conversation we were having about the systems that aren't in place and that were never designed to be supportive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, it's such a heartbreaking thing for me. And that's another part of the work that I want to do, is helping get folks access to that to the care that they need. And, be it to, offering scholarships or something like that for therapy, or, making sure that folks are connected to the resources that they need to carry on this journey, because it's, it can be a difficult one for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Well, Aisha, how are you doing grieving? I'm sorry about your mom.
Yeah, thank you.
We all know the journey's going to end, but when it does,
Mm-hmm.
it's not really what we expected.
Mm-hmm.
And how are you grieving your mom while you're still caring for your dad?
Yeah. It's an interesting dynamic, because, I think I've witnessed other folks kind of in my caregiving community, when their person eventually does pass on, they'll maybe go on this kind of, journey of self-discovery.
Self-discovery.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not my experience, because I had to just pivot and redirect my attention toward my father, and make sure that really, if for no other reason than to um, take proactive measures to ensure that this care journey is different than the one with my mother, and so I've put a lot of attention on putting those systems in place, making sure that we're reaching out to family friends and to family members. We're bringing them in early on in the process. So that's something I've been focused on. For me, in terms of grieving my mother, like Jerri mentioned earlier, when you're caring for someone, particularly for someone who has a progressive disease, the grief is happens on a continuum. And so really when my mother finally did pass, the predominant feeling that I experienced was relief in a lot of ways, which, I think it rattles some people to hear that. But there was relief for her that she was no longer suffering. There was relief for myself, that I was not at this heightened level of awareness at all times, that I could take a breath, that I could exhale for a little while. And so, grief for me is not necessarily experienced as someone who might lose someone suddenly. Grief for me shows up in the way that I care for my father. And so, kind of trying to separate those things and look at this as a new journey, is something that I've been working on. I try to focus on remembrance of my mother rather than grief over her at this point. I'll do things. She loved music and she had a beautiful singing voice. And so, while I can, I taking in as much live music. She loved gospel, she loved R&B, she loved jazz. And so really kind of leaning into those moments with my father by my side and making new memories is something that I've been focused on. But it's definitely a journey and it looks different every day. And I'm really grateful to have the kinds of supports that I do have access to.
I think that's beautiful.
Does it still show up? Now, look, I'm turning into the interviewer.
Oh, no, that's okay. All right, Jerri, you go.
So how does it show up? Do you feel like in any way you are helping your dad process grief in losing his wife?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jerri. What I find is that, or what he's shared with me is that, I truly and the embodiment of my mother and her legacy. And so, she lives on through whether I cook a meal that she may have made at one point. She was also a fabulous cook and had, she was a business owner, had a bakery, all of those things. And so I try to create those moments that we can share together. And I think that helps him to process some of his grief. But I think also, I think he was also in that same boat with me of grieving for so long, and finally just reaching that pinnacle and being able to say, okay, fine, we can rest differently now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely can share in that aspect of the relief piece. While my two parents are still here, I've lost the matriarch on both sides of the family in the span of the same time that I've been caregiving. And so I asked about the grieving of your dad because, my dad, he was literally diagnosed with dementia after losing his mom. So I do feel like there was some kind of shift there with losing her. And then 2020, he loses his older sister, a brother, and his dad within 6 weeks of each other. And we were only able, because of the pandemic, we were only able to do a service for my grandfather. So there was his older sister, who they were the two closest in age, because he's the oldest boy out of 10. The older sister, 2 weeks later, one of his brothers, and then about 3 weeks after that, my grandfather. And I really feel like my grandfather let go because he had lost two children back to back. And by the time my grandfather passed, we were in June of 2020. And so funeral homes were allowing like the limited spaced out type services. And we went up there for that. And so I feel like this journey of helping him through grieving has been a challenge because of him not being verbal and really just trying to fill out the moment. Like, is he heavy in reflection, of moments, should he even be here? Like I was even questioning, like, is this going to be good for his health to be at the service? But at the same time, not wanting to take that moment away from him. Like, that's not my decision to make. You know what I mean? So just, as a caregiver, that's been a thing, just navigating my own grief and, kind of feeling out where he is in his journey as well.
Yeah.
So because Aisha might not do this for herself, but I definitely want to lift up and highlight, the Caregivers of Color Collective that Aisha has launched and is presenting to the world. I think it's amazing. Of course, I am looking, forward to supporting in all aspects. But as we're talking about all of this, it is very befitting. It was one reason why I was like, she has to be a part of this conversation because she has already stepped out there and, made it known that it's a space that's needed. And so I definitely wanted to just put that out there that for anyone, any caregiver of color, who is looking for that support system, who is looking for that platform or that partnership, please search, find Aisha online and connect with Caregivers of Color Collective.
And what is the basis of Caregivers of Color Collective?
Yeah. So the Caregivers of Color Collective is an opportunity for folks to connect with resources that already exist that support caregivers of color. So whether that is a support group, whether that is a, whether those are healthcare professionals, whether that's an app, but, making those things available and aware, making folks aware of the resources that are available to them that they may not have privy to yet. And so we're very much in the infant stages, but thank you for the reminder, Jerri. We are growing, we're small but mighty, and I am hopeful that that we can help some folks.
Do you have a website?
Not yet, but we are on Instagram at the Caregivers of Color Collective, all one word. Yep.
Wonderful.
And I just really, I was able to connect with Aisha through my experience with caring across generations. I have watched her navigate many spaces, from afar. And my admiration for her, the more I learn, about her personal story and everything, and to see how she has shown up over the years on behalf of all caregivers, I commend you. And I take this moment to celebrate the work that you have done, the choices you have made to lift up other caregivers in the midst of your own journey. And so I thank you. I thank you for the connection and for the voice and the influence that you've even played in my journey.
Thank you so much, Jerri, for that. That's so kind of you to say. And, and I don't take that lightly coming from you, because I see the work that you do and I see the community that you cultivate and that you surround yourself with. And I admire that work, that mutual aid, that that you have been able to, you are an organizer, you are someone who, within your capacity, makes moments happen for people. And I just have such appreciation and admiration for you as well, Jerri.
I appreciate that.
Last thoughts. What advice would you give to a caregiver who's feeling overwhelmed by caring and unseen? What advice would you give them?
Connect to a community. Find your people. Whether in the healthcare system or not, find your people. We have so much at our fingertips, with Google and Chat GPT and, just all these different things. Like, take the time to push a few buttons and find your people. find a support system.
I agree. I echo that completely. Find your people. And I would also say, use your voice. You deserve to be listened to. You deserve to be believed. And your people deserve the highest quality care. And so don't be afraid to raise your voice, metaphorically or literally, whatever it takes, in that moment. But don't be afraid to fight for what you need in order to get the care that's so deserved.
Yeah. And while your loved one's life matters, your life matters too.
A big thank you to Jerri McElroy and Aisha Adkins for being my guests today. To find more information about Jerri, you can find her on Facebook at A Life for a Life, A Caregiver's Journey, or in our Daughterhood circles at daughterhood.org. And you can find Aisha at aishaadkins.com or on Instagram at Caregivers of Color Collective. Want more Daughterhood? We are more than the podcast. We are a community that offers free, nationwide, virtual support groups we call circles. These circles allow you to connect, learn, and receive that much-needed support through your caregiving journey. You can find more information at daughterhood.org, where you can register for a circle, sign up for our newsletter, find our founders blog, and of course, the podcast. Remember to also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Daughterhood. I hope you enjoyed our podcast today. Head over to daughterhood.org and click on the podcast section for show notes, including the full transcript and links to any resources and information from today's episode. You can find, subscribe, and review us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to your podcasts. You can also connect with us on Facebook and Instagram at Daughterhood. There you can discover our various circles and subscribe to our newsletter for updates. Feel free to message me on any of these sites and let me know what issues you may be facing and would like to hear more about. Or even if you just want to say hi, I'd love to hear from you. Also, a very special thank you to Susan Rowe for our theme music, the instrumental version of her beautiful song, Mama's Eyes, from her album, Lessons in Love. I hope you found what you were looking for today. Information, inspiration, or even just a little company. This is Roseanne Corcoran. I hope you'll join me next time in Daughterhood.